Carrie and Jim, thank you for coming on the show today.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us.
You're welcome, Ryan.
So, well, for our listeners, we were just kind of chatting a little bit about the family business realm and the specialties that you guys have. And I'm really excited to have you on the show because I think intergenerational transfers with family business is a huge topic. And we can't jam everything into the show today. But I think for our listeners to give them a little bit of insight into each of your guys' backgrounds and then how you ended up at EY. Can you kind of maybe, Carrie, you kind of kick it off and give your background, and then Jim, you can follow her?
Perfect. So as you said, Carrie Hall, I am a partner with EY and the America's leader of our family business network. And the network consists of EY professionals in all of our service lines who use globally integrated methodologies. We have counterparts in all areas of the world, focusing on family businesses, so it's something we can do together. And really, our mission is to help families and their businesses as they set their strategies and achieve their goals. They're often oriented towards growth, but not exclusively. And got into it just right out of school, joined EY, and started working on family businesses day one. And it's been a segment that I have specialized in for just over 30 years now, and I'm extremely passionate about. So really excited to be talking with you about it today.
And Ryan, my name is James Bly. I'm an executive director with EY's Family Enterprise Business Services, which they had acquired during this past year from us. I was one of the founders of a practice starting in 1982 that built a unique model to assist families who were interested in growing larger, more valuable businesses, not only during the course of one generation, but also in many instances transitioning them from one generation to the next. And so I've got 35 years of practice experience, and I'm now pleased to be part of the EY team that is providing services to families that own larger private middle market companies.
Well, I'm so excited to have you two on because being from coming from a family business, and I know there's a lot of family business listeners, and I think there's something unique about all of us who like to play into the world of the crazy dynamics of family businesses, because it's an interesting thing where you're wearing all these different hats as a family member and a business owner and employees and board members and all that stuff. So I think with the amount of years of experience we have with you two, we're going to be able to dive into some of the most challenging questions I think a lot of family owners have. And one of the ones that I want to kind of kick it off with is, I'm sure you guys have a little bit more of the facts, but there's the facts of how successful it is of the transition from first gen to second gen and then to third gen. Maybe to tee it up to one of you two to give us some insights on the facts that are out there on the whole family business marketplace, some of the general outlines of what we're kind of looking at.
Sure, I'd be happy to go first in talking about some of the statistics related to family businesses. And there's a common one that's quoted that varies just a little bit, but it usually is like a 30-13-3 survival ratio, where 30% of the firms survive from the first to second generation, 13 last the third generation, and only 3 survive beyond the fourth generation. And they're talked about in terms that sometimes are negative or pessimistic, but they're actually great statistics. And they show that family businesses last longer than non-family businesses. There's been some research done where if you look at the average lifespan of a company that listed in the S&P 500 index of leading U.S. companies, the average lifespan has decreased by more than 50 years in the last century, from 67 years in 1920 to just 15 years today. And if you consider that family businesses then are going in larger proportions to the next generation, it's actually, they're longer lived. If you look at Japan, there are more than 20,000 companies over 100 years old.
Holy cow.
Yep. And a handful that are more than 1,000 years old. And the oldest of which is believed to be a hotel founded in 705. Which is the oldest company in the world. And so those that have studied this longevity have concluded that, they survive so long because they're small, mostly family run, and because they focus on things that aren't necessarily tied to making a profit. So it's really that those family values and things that are coming in and causing them to be so long-lived. And I think also sometimes it's not right to look at a single operating company when you're measuring the success of family business, because there are times that it makes the best business sense to exit an operating company, perhaps to sell it to someone who can take it and take it beyond where the current owning family can. Maybe it's a rebalancing of the portfolio, wanting to go into a different business, or it could just simply be time for that business to die, and to make that decision should be considered a success as opposed to a business failure of some sort.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, and I actually heard that stat too, because it was the S&P 500 of how long those companies are living there, and an amazing amount of how many are disappearing through mergers, acquisitions, or death. So the fact that you put it in a different light, Carrie, I think is really interesting. And maybe we can kind of peel that back a little bit, going, okay, so what are they doing? What are these successful businesses and families doing that is helping that? Because you mentioned that it's not just about the profits per se, but it's more about the family and the culture. Kind of outline some of the maybe the main milestones and things that they're doing that are helping with the longevity.
Well, Ryan, I think let me take this question and actually pick up for a moment with where Carrie had left off relative to the success rate and transition from between generations. Most of the work that we do is focused on upper middle market family-controlled businesses. And in the United States, there are roughly 6,300 of those that have between $100 million to over $3 billion of annual revenue or sales. And what you find, interestingly, at the upper end of the market is that over 80% of those businesses are second through seventh generation companies as opposed to first generation companies. And so unlike the broader group of family businesses that would be smaller, not surprisingly, at the upper end, you have many that have not only grown larger, more valuable companies, but also have successfully transitioned those from one generation to the next. In fact, in our practice, we've represented families out to one that's 15th generation at this point in time, as an example. But one of the words I'm using here is transition, as opposed to the word transfer. Because what you find, if you really examine the families that are successful in moving from one generation to the next, is it typically takes 8 to 15 years to fully transition control, oversight, and executive management from an older to a younger generation. And that's also why we refer to generational transition as a process, not a plan, because implementation typically requires multiple people and steps over a number of years. And that's also a reason that we emphasize when thinking about generational transition, the focus must be on preparing the next generation for the business of tomorrow, not the business of today.
Well, that's an interesting comment, James, because and I don't want to skip ahead a little bit, but I think one of the things that you mentioned, which is transfer, it is a process, and it's the transferring of the business of tomorrow. So, understanding how to transfer that vision creation is something that I've struggled with, and I've seen our clients struggle with, where, it isn't what it used to be, and how do you move forward? And maybe, do you want to elaborate how the business owners and the families manage the vision piece of that? And I don't want to go too far ahead, but because you brought it up.
Well, Carrie, if you don't mind, I'll respond to this initially here.
Right.
When you say vision, and Ryan, oftentimes you hear words vision, strategy, mission, values, etc. And sometimes those are tossed out almost interchangeably, and sometimes it isn't clear whether there's, let's say, sort of consistent terminology that is applied. But we think of vision and the word strategy as more or less synonymous. It's the view of where are we going in the future. It doesn't necessarily address how we're going to get there. That's the mission. But the vision or the strategy is where do we go from here. And what our experience is that there are several different types of governance and management models for multi-generational family-controlled businesses. And so as part of the transition from one generation to the next, the governance model and the management model needs to be considered, and how the future vision or strategy for the business is determined would in large part depend upon the governance model that's been chosen. In some instances, as an example, it's the CEO's responsibility, working with members of his executive team, to set the strategy. And the CEO and team develop the strategy. They come to the board of directors, and they present their vision for the future of the business to the board, and the board either approves funding for it or they don't. But you also find in many other situations, and we think with more and more of the multi-generational businesses, that those companies, as part of the boards or the governance structures, actually will organize strategy committees, which will work with the CEO and the executive team on the development of the strategy and or monitoring the implementation strategy. And so in most instances, how the vision for the future is developed is a combination between a subcommittee of the board, strategy committee, and the CEO and the executive team.
It's interesting because that makes a ton of sense. And I'm curious, James or Carrie, like how difficult is it to get there? Because when you've successfully gotten to the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh generation, I think you have to have that governance model. But how often do either of you guys see that that's not in place and that has to be created? Because I know, for example, I've got a few people that I know where, and they're mid-market companies, but it's, self-run. There is maybe not a governance model or a board that is there yet. And it's kind of, senior versus junior and, conflicting ideas of where they want to take the company and with different risk tolerance and different visions and different experiences. How difficult, or what are some of the steps that you've seen them to help implement something like that?
Carrie, do you want to take that question, or would you like me to?
Well, let me just say that the scenario you just described, where you've got senior and junior, and there's starting to be some conflict and maybe different directions, is an excellent time to begin to bring on a board and getting another group in there who has the experience, the interest, and the oversight ability to help shape the family, take some of the emotion out of some of the decisions, and really serve as a good sounding board and augmentation of the skill set that currently exists within the company. Clearly, a board is a best practice, and there can be a lot of catalysts for someone deciding it's time, but as they start to get large and have divergent interests in the family, again, is an excellent time to bring one on.
Well, yeah, and I feel that it's taking the emotion out, I think, is the biggest challenge that maybe the successful companies have figured out a way to do that. Either of you have any examples about the easiest way to take the emotion out of these decisions and how to actually make it about the business and not about the family dynamics?
Well, I think that's where the word process comes in, because to the extent that if you think about what makes most businesses successful in the first place, they have a lot of processes that they develop over time. That can range from customer relationship management processes to innovation processes to operational processes, et cetera. And the growth and development of a business requires a process as well. And usually, to the extent that you, as part of the process, you are developing better data, with regard to, that can be internal data and external data, to better understand the context in which the business is operating, and so that you can compartmentalize things typically in three areas. One would be what we refer to as growth and competitive factors, and that can range, Ryan, from changing economic environment to how strong the company's external research is, the rate of industry consolidation or change that's occurring, how effective their growth strategy has been over the past maybe 5 or 6 years. No sense of how aggressive their competitors are, whether they're changing customer preferences, and certainly the impact of things like technology and business model disruptions, or even with some businesses, they suffer from a lack of innovation. So those would be growth and competitive factors. And while there can be, let's say, variances of maybe qualitative view about those things, in most instances you can pull data together that gives you better quantitative analytics that can be applied to help separate fact from fluff or emotion. But then there's also two other categories. Another important category is that growing businesses need capital to support their growth, and of course, historically, we've many instances have had more businesses impacted by changing conditions in the capital markets. Industries fall out of favor with banks or lenders. The conditions in the capital markets can change. They sometimes end up with, therefore, capital providers that are not aligned with the long-term objectives of the business of the owners. Some companies are stuck with a burdensome cost of capital, etc. So
been there.
Right. So the capital funding factors are important, and then also one of the things that's clear is that if everyone at the moment is doing a good job working together, you've got your growth and competitive factors straight, you've got the right type of capital structure in place, and you're going to be building a larger, more valuable business looking out over an 8 or 10 or 15-year period of time. You need to think through whether the intent is to preferably hold or pass that business into the next generation. And if, in fact, the leaning or the preference among most, not always all, but most of the shareholders would be to successfully transition a growing and profitable business into the next generation, then the third leg in the stool is there's a number of transition and continuity factors that need to be addressed. It can be, an unclear strategy at the ownership level. It could be weak succession management. There might be the governance structure that has worked in a given generation. Most instances would need to change going into the next generation. There can be conflicts about risk among the shareholders, unprepared heirs, etc. So what we found is that, in fact, we have a generational transition risk assessment survey, which is a highly effective tools for family-controlled businesses to take and use to kind of gauge in some of these key areas how well prepared their business might be. And by using a survey tool of that sort, it can also take some of the emotion out of the decision-making, because the survey tool has been based upon sort of demonstrated best practices with some of these large, successful, multi-generational businesses. I hope that helps answer your question.
No, I think it does. And, I think the first two are really interesting because those are outside factors. And then you have all the internal factors, which, I think all those get mixed up sometimes. So clarifying the different, I think the different buckets is important before you can even address them. And
it is.
Because otherwise it's difficult to understand what you're talking about, whether it's because our business was a copier and managed IT business, and it was the industry was changing and the pricing was changing, but then that also impacted our internal communication of what we wanted to do. And it's interesting because I think it's a good way to focus in on exactly what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And, question for you, Carrie, because I know I don't know if you started out as a CPA or you still a CPA. And I think, the financials of the businesses, and I'm kind of curious on both your guys' perspective on this, but how, the business might be ready, but how do you start addressing the financials and the maturity of the financial reporting when it's going from maybe like a middle market lifestyle business of a lot of fun, cool stuff to having the clarity of that data to be able to actually address any of these? I mean, Carrie, do you have any kind of insight on how you've watched the evolution of the financials of a family business like that?
So to answer your question, yes, I am a CPA and I'm still practicing as an auditor as well. So I get some insight into financials, but really it's a growth in sophistication as the companies grow. It's a separation of personal from corporate as part of good governance. It's setting more internal controls with the financial reporting. It could be hiring more external expertise, but just kind of a stair step as the complexity of the business warrants and the size and scale of the business warrants. If you have external parties involved from various aspects, perhaps in lending or other arrangements, there's another level of sophistication that brings on as well. Ryan, is that answering what you were?
Yeah. It's just like, it's so, because I mean, I've heard stories of the 80-year-old owner who hasn't shown his 55-year-old son the financials yet.
That's a different question.
Right. No, but I think it's all intertwined. So I think it's, it's trying to get the mental readiness of the original founders or the family members to trust, and somehow it's the trust in the financials and then the decision making. There's so many of these different parts of, I think maybe my question is because all of those things are so intertwined, like, starting that process, because the financials are different than the strategy, different than the roles and responsibilities. But I see a lot with our clients or people I've interviewed or in our old situation that it's trying to unwind all of those and address all those differently. And the financials always end up being a piece of it because there's a lifestyle and a control that's tied to that, which then kind of ripples into all the different behaviors. So I don't know if I confused you more or more just trying to say, I don't know if there's a way that you start going through that because it's difficult to start.
Yeah, I heard different things there. Let me offer a couple perspectives, and I'm sure Jim has some as well. I think that transparency was one thing that I heard. And if you've got the 80-year-old who's holding things close to the vest, it's not a very good strategy if you're hoping that someone is going to be your successor in the business, because really you can't start too young, in my opinion, in grooming successors or a pool of people from whom to choose within the family. And part of that is absolutely understanding and having respect for the financial situation of both the business and the family, so that you're learning what that means and how to be good stewards. Financial literacy is extremely important and needs to be built into the education curriculum of a young family member or business owning family member, just like other aspects of education are, as well as what it means to be a good shareholder and other aspects of education. And then good communication needs to take place as well. There needs to be clear communication of what the expectations are, what the desires are, particularly as someone is nearing the point of time in which they are looking to perhaps slow down or exit the business. It's really common out of SGF. We had a panel of next gen members there, and one of the things they talked about the most was they wished that the prior generation had shared more with them, had told them more about the visions. In some cases, they were gone at this point. It was too late. They couldn't ask the questions that they wanted to ask. So it's really important to be able to have that open and candid dialogue.
Right. And Ryan, what we've learned is that there are roughly 11 categories to gather what we refer to as facts and issues, because the perspectives, both, let's say, within the family or within a boardroom or within an executive team or within an organization, the perspectives on these 11 facts and issue categories ultimately influence the view in terms of the critical questions that need to be asked on matters relating to where do we go from here or how are we going to do it. And this is, and by using the, let's say, facts and issues methodology, it's a great way to put a process in place, and it's a great way to take a lot of the emotion out of the decision making. And those 11 issues I can run through here quickly. The first is understanding the company's core market, and then the second is the company's business model and its economic model. The third is the company's value proposition. Why do people want to do business with the company? Who its customers are. And it's surprising how many companies don't fully know their customers. And because they don't, they then also can't really analyze who additional customers might be. The fifth area is a good handle on the competitive landscape. Many companies aren't even clear on their competitors, much less who owns the competitors, how the competitors are capitalized, etc. Into the sixth category, it's understanding the organizational capabilities, which sometimes actually can be mapped on a resource basis within organization. And then, of course, the operational capabilities is next. Personnel and talent is right behind that. The financial management and control systems would be next. And the last two categories, the 10th would be the companies, let's call it technology or domain expertise. And the final one is risk management. And people when they think of risk, oftentimes think, well, that's how do we protect ourselves from the sky falling? But the fact of the matter is that there can be risks on the way up. How do you fill orders? How do you control growth? As much as risk on the way down. So those are the 11 categories where if you then begin pulling together the view on facts and issues that would be in each one of those categories, that ultimately is what drives the dialogue to address issues such as the ones we're talking about here today.
Well, it's interesting because I think, by breaking them into different chunks like that and having a process around each of them, because you don't have to transfer it's not like you're just transferring all of you immediately tomorrow to someone else. So you can, I'm assuming you're approaching all these different categories in different ways that you're transitioning the decisions and the visions and the responsibilities on each of these different things. Is there a certain area that you usually start first as you're kind of looking at where they are in all these different areas?
We usually start with where the principal owners or principal decision makers, feel the major issues or the pain points and the difficulties that they're having with moving forward, for one reason or the other. And all of these things ultimately tie together. And in fact, in many instances, what you find is that because they're stuck on one or two things, they're also missing some others, and that helps you again put this process in place. But if you think of corporate development best practices, once you would have the let's say reasonable clarity in terms of the facts and issues, then if you think of the corporate development best practices, there are roughly 10 building blocks for corporate development. Those range from organizational design and culture and effectiveness and any changes that might be needed there, to things such as the capital structure, external research, acquisitions and divestitures, etc. I won't bore you going through another list here today, but by having clarity with regard to the facts and issues, and then understanding that there's 10 fundamental corporate development building blocks that can be used in whole or part at a given phase or life cycle point for a business, you can do a really great job of effectively moving the needle to aligning view, reducing conflict, and propelling business growth.
So then how are you, if you're doing that, which makes a lot of sense as you're kind of breaking it down into the fundamentals, and what do you do when you're analyzing these different 11 categories and the building blocks, identify the gaps between the different skill sets? Because you usually can't replicate yourself. So if I'm passing it on to the second generation, there's usually going to be lots of gaps, whether it's financial. Out of those 11, there might be different, capabilities that, my son or daughter might have that I don't have, or, all these different things. How do you recalibrate how to fill in the gaps and how to eliminate the egos and then potentially bring in outside people? I mean, what are the easiest ways to eliminate the egos in that situation?
Eliminating the egos is not always easy. I mean, I've found that the more factually based you can become, the more dispassionate people can be with regard to understanding the situation, and it really, really does help to diffuse the impact of egos as part of decision making. We all have egos, and most of us like to be right. Few of us like to be wrong, and yet to the extent that you can reach at least a consensus view, not necessarily everybody agreeing, but the bulk of the people involved reach a consensus view with regard to facts and issues, then which of the building blocks need to be applied almost fall into order almost magically.
So then how do you deal with bringing let's maybe dive like a little bit deeper into some of the technical stuff. So as you're kind of going through this and you're identifying some gaps and everything, what do you see in how these deals are actually structured? Maybe, Carrie or James, give a little bit of an example on how do you transfer the roles and responsibilities, and then also, how is this structured? Is it through gifting, bonus programs? Is it through leverage? Because the way that I've described it to some of our clients, or I've heard other people describe it, is you kind of got the equity situation where you're actually getting involved that way, but then that doesn't necessarily have to be in parallel with the roles and responsibilities and all these other different factors. So how do you mirror those or align all those together?
Well, you first need to understand the organization that exists today, how it's controlled, and what the background and experience is, not just of the CEO, but professional advisors, board members. Sometimes you've got non-family executives in many instances in place, etc. And you need to examine how, in essence, effectively the current organization is at running today's business. And then as you begin to think about tomorrow's business, you begin to think about or design the organization of tomorrow. And that gets you into the skill or experience gaps that might need to be filled. It gets into the people development, etc. Because your businesses usually don't succeed, and they don't typically grow to be larger and more valuable to the extent that there's no change in the organizational design. And so by it's almost like building a home, where you try to make your mistakes on paper through drawings and renderings and CAD models, etc. And same too with the organization. And by doing that, one of the words that is often misused, we feel, is succession planning. And what succession planning technically means is finding tomorrow's replacement for a given person or organization who has a certain set of skills. And in some instances, that's what's needed. But in most instances, what you need to address is what we refer to as succession management, which is understanding the future organization, the future skills that will be needed. And not surprisingly, if you've had a CEO who's done a great job of building a larger, more valuable business over the last 35 years, it's not inconceivable that to extend the growth of that business, tackle other challenges during the next 25, it could be different skills than what has brought along for the last 3 decades. Mm-hmm. And so that needs to be modeled out.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you're kind of taking the words away from we're replacing you to like, it's almost like an S curve in my head. As you kind of got that, you're just doubling down and reinventing what you're going to be doing in the future, but you're not necessarily having to replace anybody. It's just like recalibrating how the whole structure is working.
Right.
So it may be a question for you, Carrie, because when you're looking at, let's say, you've got this situation kind of lined up and you're figuring out where the roles and responsibilities are. Do you have any examples on how these deals are actually structured from like the financial buy-in from the second generation? And so that's the first question. And then maybe we can tee it up to follow that would be kind of the active versus non-active kids, because this whole equity buying in, and I think it gets really muddy. So I don't know. What are your experiences on how people usually go about doing this? That you see that has really successfully worked, and then how do you deal with the active versus non-active kids?
So as much as I want to speak, I have to say I think Jim is probably better suited to talk about the structures.
Well, and actually it's interesting because this is a great question, and my experience, Ryan, is that it never seems to be quite as clear as active versus non-active. In a first going to second generation family, obviously the first generation you've got an active shareholder, because if you didn't have an active family member, there wouldn't be a business in the first place, right? And often if there are a number of children or siblings, you find some who might be more interested or more active than others. But we've had a good number of first generation entrepreneurs who've had only one child, and frankly, some of the more successful transitions between first and second generation has been if there is only one child, because there's no sibling rivalry in those situations. But even as you move into the second or third or fourth or fifth generation, and even though statistically then there would be fewer lineal descendants who would either have the interest or competency or skill sets that might be required, it doesn't necessarily force people into like an active versus non-active camp, because what you find, especially as the businesses are growing, and also importantly, when you look at 80% of the middle market family controlled businesses in the United States are located within a 1 hour drive of 36 smaller cities. So it's places like Pittsburgh and Indianapolis, Cincinnati, etc. And as you take an hour's drive outside of any of those cities, you're pretty quickly in a small town or a rural area. And that's where most of these businesses are located. What you find is as long as the businesses are growing and profitable, the owners do tend to operate these businesses at some level with a purpose beyond profit, and in that they not only try to be consciously good employers, but they frequently do things such as build community centers, support the churches and the schools and the hospitals and the little league teams, etc. And so what you find with a number of these families is that there's different ways that owners can be active. Some of the family members would end up being senior executives in the company, or maybe managers in the business. Some of the families have employment policies and career development programs where younger family members who are interested would come in as an employee and would work their way up. You've got others who've had success with their careers outside of the business, but they might be a board member, or some can be professional advisors. Many of the larger families have family offices or family foundations with some of the multi-generational out into the third, fourth, fifth generation. You get into family councils and or people who are kind of active owners or on ownership boards with some of these businesses. So we find that in most instances, it isn't purely active versus non-active, and there can be a range of important roles that don't always necessarily being the person running the business or even having an interest in doing that.
Well, and I totally agree with everything you said too. And honestly, probably a very healthy family business has a lot of those different dynamics in it, because it is a lot of the purpose over profit and intertwined with the community and the employees and the families and stuff. One of the things that I've seen that's been a challenge, and or I've seen it, personally experienced it, where how do you, in that scenario, let's say you've got, the second generation who's got a CEO that's going to be taking over and is going to be growing the family business and doubles the size of the business. So you get the CEO salary and distributions. And then you've also got all these other people that are, organizing little league games, just obviously to make it a very dramatic difference. But how to split the estate versus the sweat equity, or the salary and the wages, and then so that's tied into what happens if that CEO doubles the company, who gets the benefit? Because that's where the estate and the company and the roles and salaries all kind of get intertwined. How do you unwind that to make it very fair for everybody, whatever role they want to take?
Well, I think that's where it's kind of fair and informed process comes in, and because I think the issue is, if someone is making a contribution to enhance the value of the business, maybe beyond what an average owner or shareholder might be doing, and if you think about it first and foremost from the standpoint of a family where there are no owners who are in the executive suite, and there's a good number of those out there, and in those instances, a number of those executives will have incentive-based compensation. It's not always shares. Sometimes it's options. Sometimes it's phantom shares, etc. Mm-hmm. But generally speaking, whether it's a family member that is in the a key leadership seat or a non-family member, there's ways to fairly compensate them for what they're doing in terms of running the business or minding the store on behalf of the owners. Mm-hmm. And so too, I mean, if you have a family member who is in charge of community relations, if you have a family member who is representing the family and the business in terms of their philanthropic activities or their social capital or well-doing, etc. There are ways to appropriately compensate such individuals for what they're doing, and in many instances, of course, it would be the key leaders that are driving equity value creation. Because let's face it, a successful, profitable, and growing family-controlled business is sort of the goose that lays the golden eggs, and and the health of the goose is important. So,
so everybody should want that to happen because it actually benefits everybody.
It does.
Well, so I mean, what I'm hearing is that just really having the clarity and treating the family business as a normal business without family members, and then laying the family members with the right roles, the right responsibilities and skill sets into the right things, and having the normal compensation structures, even if they weren't family members, and just having it very clear is kind of what I gathered from that.
Right, and that's actually one of the key reasons that you find that one of the big differences between these successful multi-generational family businesses and other companies. And the key difference is that most of these families put what we refer to as parallel governance systems in place, and what they actually do is they split governance between what we refer to as business governance versus owner governance. And on the business governance side, the objective there is to give the people who generally have ownership stakes, now that can be shareholders, trustees, beneficiaries, etc. But on the business governance side, the responsibility is to give the people who have an ownership stake, give them operational confidence that somebody's minding the store, mm-hmm. that goose that's laying the golden eggs is being well cared for, and it'll be healthy into the future. On the other side, in the owner's governance side, the key there is to build human capital and emotional development among the owners today and future owners and influencers, so that you can have group learning, you can have preparation for good stewardship, cooperation, and you can ultimately in that way have better consensus over the direction that would be provided by the owners or shareholders to the board. And all of those things tie into what we refer to as patient capital. So what you find is that with these parallel governance systems, you've got an effort on the owner side to build patient capital into the future, and on the business side, you have an effort to instill operational competence in the owners.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful way of looking at it. What are the different ways that you've seen that things will go south fast? I mean, because I think that, obviously it happens. So, what are some of the biggest roadblocks that are very difficult to overcome that are not looking towards the benefit of the business? I mean, I don't know if you see a common theme among the ones that actually end up having to just sell it outright because of the situations?
Most common theme is to not put adequate time into these things that we're discussing today. It never ceases to amaze me at how many very successful founders or CEOs or next generation leaders, we're working with some right now that are fourth generation, but candidly, they, in their instance, haven't put as much time or effort into these things as is an example of their father or grandfather had done. And so it isn't always just a first generation going to second. What you find is that one of the biggest reasons, one of the biggest causes for failure is that the people who have driven success during the current generation act as if things will just take care of themselves. And one of the big problems that I've experienced my own life as well, candidly, is it's sometimes hard to imagine a world in which we're not part of, and so being able to put again process in place, recognize that doing it right oftentimes takes 8, 10, 12, 15 years, and that without an organized process and without time going into it, look, these businesses wouldn't typically, as I've already mentioned, be profitable if somebody hadn't put a lot of time into processes, and the same thing has to occur on planning for the future and the transition of the business. And if not, more likely than not, it's going to fail, and it's going to be a takeover candidate for someone then.
Mm-hmm. Carrie, is there anything? Oh, I was going to say. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add something in that when you think about this preparation, it isn't just focused on business, but also the family that we've been talking about as well. And we've found through research that the largest, oldest, most profitable family businesses, they have a dual focus on the business family. It's not one or the expense or the other. And that strong family really, and that cohesive family really is a benefit when some adversity is there and the family needs to then reach a decision in a cooperative manner about something of strategic importance. And because they've laid that groundwork, they've clarified their mission, they have good communication skills, they're familiar with what's going on in the business through all of the good governance practices, it really gives them the leg up, whether it's the unexpected need for a successor because there's been some event or something derogatory has happened in the business that's causing a real crisis there, and the family has to rally around together to meet that need. So just can't overemphasize the importance of focusing on not only the business proactive the good governance, but the family itself as well.
Well, it's got to be interesting. I mean, every business where once you have it's interesting because it's so tied into the family where, you've got your core mission, vision, core values, all that kind of stuff, where if you don't have that as a family, when a challenge arises where you've got to deal with it or sell a piece of the business or buy something, if you don't have a framework of how you're going to make that decision, you're going to have to do it on the spot, which I'm assuming just, the tension and the turmoil arises out of not having clarity of what you're trying to accomplish.
And can literally at that point tear families apart, unfortunately, which then leads to the disbanding of the business.
It's interesting. Right. I had this client of ours talk, and as we were sitting at dinner, he goes, because we were kind of working through some of this stuff, and he goes, literally, sometimes it's easier just to die than deal with this. So literally what he said. Is there anything, Carrie, that you've seen with all your years of experience that you saw something and is there a couple common themes where you said, if they would have just done these things, they probably would have made it, and maybe they didn't because they weren't able to overcome it?
I think it's common to see, particularly when it's a very high growth company and a lot of focus is being put on the business to focus on that. But those that seem to have the best transitions are those who've really defined who's responsible for succession, who's responsible for the strategy, and often that's going to be the board of directors. They really focus on the next generation and communicating with them, getting them ready to step in as appropriate if that indeed is what they want to do in the business, or just to be a good shareholder.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that you two have seen? Because I know you come from different practices and you've probably addressed the situation differently. But like, what are the ways that you've helped prep the next generation, or you've seen people that have really successfully groomed those next generation? Other than like, I was just dragged into bank meetings when I was 21. That was just it, and I just sat there going, "Okay, I have no idea what they're talking about, but I'm soaking it up." But like, other than doing that, is there certain things in processes or things that you've done for that next generation as you have prepped them to take on the responsibility that they're about to experience?
I'll tell you that the ones that do it really well, they start very early. So being dragged into a business was good. There might have been opportunities earlier on, but there are families that have curriculums that are designed to start at preschool age and go up to the most senior members of the family with age-appropriate learning about the family business and what that means. Helping identify a peer group with other business owning families is a really good support system. Teaching the financial literacy, what we've already talked about. Family meetings and board meetings, when they're ready for those, are really good avenues too. And EY specifically does have a program called the EY Next Gen program. It is a global program where we take young members of business owning families, divide them into 3 age and experience levels, and provide content at top tier universities around the globe for 1 week periods at a time. They're taught by top tier academics, by EY professionals, by business leaders, family business leaders. And at the conclusion of the 1 week program, they are then part of an alumni group. It's about 600 strong right now, that provides a support system and continued mentorship and peer support of each other. And we have found that it's been really successful and helpful, both from the families that are sending these young men and women into the program, and then the attendees themselves to have a better appreciation for what it means to be part of a business owning family, help clarify in their minds what they want their role to be, and develop their own personal path forward.
Right. I think it's just fantastic because I mean the challenges of having that next generation and getting the right expectations, then the communication becomes a heck of a lot easier, because I mean everything from down from the financials and how do you do certain things. There was this one conversation where I think there's this misperception from the second generation or whatever the next generation is a lot of times where, mom and dad make a pile of money and then they don't know what phantom income is and they have no idea like the risk and all these different things. So when you start to peel it back, they go, oh my gosh, maybe mom and dad are not, maybe on paper they're worth a lot of money, but this is not as luscious as it looked originally. So you're just writing the expectations versus saying, hey, I deserve a bunch of this, even though they don't know what this is.
I think you're right on. And as the family grows and the pie gets split in smaller pieces, that dependency has to change. So it is really important to understand the limitations at an early age and not have that great dependency on the business, because those dividends are coming at the expense of reinvestment in the company. And again, part of good business strategy and family understanding of what they want the business to mean to the family. There are some that don't take a dime out of the business, but they want the business to be family owned forever.
Right. There was a story. There was a friend of mine. He owns a firm down in Texas that they work with minimum net worth of $25 million families. And there was a gentleman, I can't remember exactly what the business was, but I want to say it was retail, like 1,200 stores. And all the kids wanted the money. And he's like, we'd have to sell everything. Again, you're just like, and again, I think that was the example of the 55-year-old and the 80-year-old where there's just not an awareness of the whole environment. So you can't actually have a productive conversation because of how disjointed the expectations are. Education and communication. It's hard to start too early. Right. So as we're kind of wrapping up, James and Carrie, is there something that each of you want to highlight that we've discussed or maybe add to in order to, leave our listeners with?
Well, as I've mentioned a number of times, I think it's a matter of understanding the kind of the process methodology that a number of these successful families have used to support both the growth and development and financing of their companies, but also the generational transition. And ultimately, Ryan, if you read all of the books published on the subject, you'll find that there's no magic bullet. There's no one formula that applies to everyone or any given business, and so it's a matter of coming up with ultimately a formulation of one. There are never two businesses that are exactly the same, never two groups of owners that are the same, balance sheets, et cetera. But if you can start with a framework of basically understanding the tools and methodologies and processes that the families that have demonstrated competency in growing larger businesses and transitioning them have used, and then you take the facts of your situation and look at it in context, you find that you can very efficiently design a formula that will work great for your business and will be based upon these best practices and typically can produce tremendous results.
I love it. How about you, Carrie?
Yeah, I would just add on, agree with all of that, and would say also don't forget to focus on the family at the same time, making sure that you are devoting equal attention to that as well. And then don't be afraid to ask for outside assistance as well, particularly as you grow. That could be your board of directors, your board of advisors, non-family executive members. But surrounding yourself with people that have different skill sets, different views, can only expand your thoughts, and you don't know where it might lead as far as new business opportunities and new opportunities for the family as well.
And I think, and I would almost reiterate that it's almost a must if you're going to actually do it successfully, because you got to get the third party perspective instead of having it just be you versus me or them or something. It's more about the process and getting someone that's not emotionally tied to the goose and the egg.
I agree.
Well, thank you two so much for coming on the show. What is the best way for our listeners to get in touch with each of you? I
would say email for me, and it's carrie.hall@ey.com. That's carrie.hall@ey.com.
And right on my end, it's James Bly. It's james.bly, B-L-Y, @ey.com.
Thank you two so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us. Enjoy the chat today.